3 children were born during a winter storm. No bones, no blood, just a clear glowing fluid beneath their skin. And Hollow Creek has never spoken of them again. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is a true story buried in the forgotten history of early America, hidden beneath layers of dark rituals, whispered about only by those who dare remember. In 1832, deep in the snow-choked woods of Missouri, something unspeakable was brought into this world, not by accident, but by design. The locals called it a miracle birth. The midwife called it a curse. The doctor never spoke again. And every 30 years, the whispering woods grow louder. This video uncovers one of the most disturbing cases of unsolved legend and true horror on American soil. If you've ever wondered what lies beyond the line where medicine fails and myth begins, stay with us. Because what was born that night was never human. They say Hollow Creek was always cold, but that winter it was cruel. The year was 1832, and the snow came down like ash from a sky that refused to warm. Beneath the frost-bitten stillness of Missouri's forgotten woods, something ancient stirred. This wasn't just another frontier town. Hollow Creek was a place where whispers travelled faster than fire, where true stories twisted into ghost tales, and where outsiders learned to leave well enough alone. Folk spoke in low voices about the land being thin out there, that the veil between worlds didn't hold the way it should. Most ignored the warnings. But on one brutal January night, a doctor would be called into the woods, and everything would begin to unravel. The snow hadn't stopped in 7 days, and on the 8th, something knocked from beneath the ground. That's what the old records say, though most won't admit those records exist. In the heart of Missouri's Deadwood, 1832 temperatures dropped to 20 below zero, and Hollow Creek became a frozen tomb. Families burned furniture to survive, animals froze upright in the fields, and the sky itself turned a shade of grey that never left. But it wasn't the cold that haunted them. It was the silence. No birds, no wind. No sound except the knock. Locals whispered that it began near Widow's Hill, where the earth sank unnaturally and the trees refused to grow straight. Some claimed it was just frost shifting. Others said it was the roots waking up. But one thing was certain, that winter was not ordinary, and Hollow Creek would never be the same. Town records from that week were mysteriously lost, save for a single journal entry from a travelling physician who was summoned in the storm. What he saw, what he delivered, was never supposed to exist, and yet it came anyway. Just past midnight, his lantern went out, and the knocking grew louder. The child was born without a cry, and the midwife swore its eyes were already open. That was the first thing, Doctor. Elias Harrow was told when he arrived at the Blackthorn cabin 3 miles beyond the edge of Hollow Creek just before dawn. The snow had buried the fences. The chimney smoked black against a sky that refused to lift, and inside the one-room structure something ancient and unnatural had entered the world. Mercy Blackthorn, pale and near unconscious, lay still on the straw mattress, while her husband Silas whispered prayers in a language the doctor did not recognize. There was no blood, no cord, no pain, only the child silent, unmoving, with translucent skin that shimmered faintly beneath the lantern light. The midwife, Agnes Rook, refused to touch it again. She had wrapped it in wool and stepped away, lips, trembling eyes fixed on the floor. "It's not right," she whispered. It was never inside her, and yet it came from her. The air in the cabin was too still, too heavy, and the wood stove hissed like it knew something. Doctor, Harrow approached the child, and that's when he noticed the frost melting in a perfect circle around it. A heat that pulsed, but not from any heartbeat. Something else had been born, and it wasn't done yet. When the call came, the sheriff wouldn't go, but the doctor did. It was near 2 a.m. when the knock rattled the frost-bitten window pane of Dr. Elias Harrow's quarters. A boy no older than 12 stood barefoot in the snow eyes, wide and glassy. "She's delivering," he whispered. "It's not normal." The doctor, half asleep and wrapped in wool, followed the child on horseback through the tree-thick path known by locals as Dead Whisper Hollow, a place avoided even in summer. That night, it felt different. The cold wasn't just biting, it was watching. The hooves didn't echo, the wind didn't blow, and even the oil in Harrow's lantern seemed reluctant to burn. They passed a stone marker, older than the town itself, etched with no name, only a spiral. "We're close," the boy said, though his breath didn't fog. 3 miles deeper, the trees began to curve inward, unnaturally symmetrical, as if shaped by unseen hands. When the cabin came into view, its windows were glowing, not with firelight, but something faintly blue. No sound, no crying, just the door swinging open slowly on its own. Something was waiting inside, and it had been waiting a very long time. What was inside that cabin should not have been alive yet. It breathed, and that air bent around it like heat of scorched earth. As Dr. Harrow stepped across the threshold, the scent hit him first. Not blood, not birth, but iron ash, and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. The fire had died, yet the room was warm. Too warm. Mercy Blackthorne lay motionless, lips cracked with frost, while the baby, if it could be called, that sat upright eyes, locked on the doctor, unblinking. Agnes, the midwife, stood in the corner, whispering to the wall. Silas was gone. No footprints in the snow, no sound of a door, just gone. And in that thick, suffocating silence, the child began to hum. A note too low for human ears, but the glass lantern began to tremble. The doctor's journal from that night ends with one sentence scrawled and broken. It spoke in my mother's voice, and she's been dead 10 years. That was only the beginning, because the other 2 births were still to come, and Hollow Creek was already cracking at the edges. It didn't blink, not once. Not when I moved, not when I touched it. And I swear, it recognized me. That was the first line Dr. Harrow spoke aloud after leaving the Blackthorn cabin, though no one ever admitted to hearing him say it. The child, if that's what it was, had the shape of a newborn, but not the weight. It was far too light, like hollow bone wrapped in damp silk. Its skin was smooth, but cold, almost glassy, and beneath it, instead of veins, there was something glowing, slowly shifting like ink in water. When Harrow held his lantern closer, the flame pulled sideways, bending unnaturally toward the child, as though it were drawing energy. He felt dizzy, not from exhaustion, from disorientation, like reality was beginning to loosen. Agnes Rook refused to speak, simply tracing circles into the dirt with her finger, whispering names. Harrow didn't recognize names that didn't sound English or German or French. And then the child smiled. No sound, no muscle movement. Just a shift in presence, like the room had been let in on a terrible joke. Harrow stumbled back. The floor beneath him wasn't wood anymore, it was damp earth. He hadn't moved. The cabin had. There was no wind outside, but the curtains moved like someone had just left the room. Dr. Harrow stood frozen, the lantern dimming, even as he added more oil. It was as if light refused to stay in the presence of that child. Agnes had gone silent, her eyes fixed on a corner of the cabin where no one stood, but her lips moved, repeating a phrase over and over in a hoarse voice. Not born, not made, not buried. The doctor reached for his bag, hands trembling, but every metal instrument inside had gone ice-cold, brittle, cracked, like they'd been dropped into liquid nitrogen. The child began to hum again, not from its throat, but from the walls. The nails in the wooden beams shivered. Every breath Harrow took felt like inhaling sand and snow. He tried to examine the mother, but Mercy's pulse was slow, too slow, and her breath came out in wisps of black mist. That's when he saw the marks, 3 small dots, burned into her collarbone, forming a perfect triangle. Not ink, not ash, heat from the inside. And just beneath the floorboards something shifted, almost like breathing, but deeper, slower, waiting. And Harrow realised he was no longer the one doing the observing. The mirror didn't show the baby, but it showed something else standing where it lay. That was the moment Dr. Harrow stopped calling it a child. On the far wall of the cabin hung a small tarnished mirror cracked across the centre. Harrow hadn't noticed it before, but as he turned to check Mercy's vitals, his eyes caught something impossible. The cradle was there, rocking slightly. The shape of the swaddled figure was there. But in the mirror, the reflection was wrong. Instead of a child, there stood a tall, narrow figure draped in dark folds, its face obscured by flickering static like heat on metal. It didn't move, but Harrow knew it was looking directly at him. He spun around, nothing. The cradle held the silent baby unmoving, watching. Yet in the mirror, the figure had stepped 1 pace closer. No sound, no explanation. Agnes Rook began to cry, not loudly, but the kind of quiet sobbing that made the air feel heavier. "It's not a baby," she whispered. "It's a door." Harrow tried to speak, but his voice didn't come. Not even a rasp. The mirror cracked again. And this time the reflection didn't match the room at all. It showed a forest burning in reverse. 3 nights later, the second child was born, on land no woman had stepped foot on in 50 years. It happened without warning, deep in the northern ridge where the soil never thawed and the trees grew in circles. This time, there was no midwife, no doctor. Just a scream that split the sky like thunder, and then nothing. The townsfolk awoke to the smell of smoke, but no fire could be found. Only a trail of scorched earth spiralling out from the old Whitlow cabin, long thought abandoned. What emerged from that place didn't crawl or cry. It walked. Fully upright eyes, black as river stones, skin slick, like it hadn't been born but unearthed. And in its fist, clenched tight, was something no one could explain, a tooth that did not belong to any known species. From that moment forward the snow stopped falling, but the cold got worse, and Hollow Creek began to change. What began as whispers would soon become panic, because the third arrival was coming, and this time it wouldn't wait for the veil to lift. They boarded up their windows, but the light still bled through from the wrong side. After the second birth, Hollow Creek changed. The birds left first, vanishing overnight with no feathers, no nests, just silence. Then came the static. Radios crackled with voices that didn't belong, whispering backwards prayers and numbers that never repeated. People began locking their doors in the daylight. The town's only preacher, Father Mallory, tried to hold service, but collapsed mid-sermon, eyes rolled back, mumbling in a child's voice. He never spoke again. Agnes Rook, the midwife, walked into the woods one morning holding a Bible and a lantern. They found the Bible torn to pieces, but not the lantern. It was still lit, placed neatly on her front porch the next day. Dr. Harrow tried to send a telegram to the next town over, but the line hissed and returned only one phrase: already inside. Trapped in their own streets, with no help coming and no explanation. The townsfolk began to lose grip on reality, on time, on themselves. And beneath it all, the earth began to breathe louder. Something was burrowing, closer, deeper, and it didn't need permission to rise. By the time the third child came, Hollow Creek no longer appeared on any map. People didn't leave. They disappeared. Mail stopped arriving. Roads twisted overnight. What once led to the next town now curled back to the same clearing, no matter how far one travelled. Children stopped speaking. Dogs howled at noon. And the sky? It flickered. Dr. Harrow, gaunt and sleepless, scribbled frantic notes in journals that bled ink in strange spirals. He swore the third child would complete something, some pattern he couldn't unsee. Agnes Rook returned one morning barefoot, with roots growing through her hair and eyes as black as pond water. She said the soil remembers, and then bit off her own tongue. The town gathered what was left of their courage and tried to burn the Whitlow cabin, but the fire wouldn't catch, not on wood, not even on kerosene. The wind screamed back at them in the voice of someone they loved. Every attempt to fight was met with a mirror of their worst fears. The ground pulsed. Crops withered. Babies were born still but humming. They weren't just isolated, they had become part of a living trap, a loop. And the final piece was only days away. You couldn't leave Hollow Creek anymore because something else had already taken your place. That realization struck when Sheriff Boone tried to escape with his daughter. He drove for 7 straight hours, never turning back, never stopping yet. Every road spat him out at the same crossroads, with the same dead crow, nailed to the same tree. When he returned home, he saw himself through the window, sitting at the table, eating dinner, smiling. Boone never entered the house again. No one saw him after that night. Across town, reflections stopped sinking with movement. Mirrors showed people crying when they were still. In one home, a girl's shadow refused to follow her. Families began marking their doors with salt blood and scripture, but whatever was coming didn't need an invitation. Agnes's final warning, stitched into the inside of her own skin, read, "It doesn't want worship. It wants memory." Dr. Harrow watched as the town folded in on itself, street by street, like a map being erased. He understood now the 3 were not children. They were anchors. And the third was already here, breathing, watching, rewriting. When the snow turned black, Hollow Creek finally understood. It hadn't been forgotten by the world. It had been erased. The air grew thick, not with fog, but with something ancient, something that hummed beneath the skin like a low fever. People began dreaming in languages no one had spoken for thousands of years, waking with nosebleeds and the taste of copper. The town clock melted, then reversed. And in the silence that followed, the veil finally tore. What stepped through wasn't a demon or a ghost or a god. It was something older, and it wanted to be remembered. But remembrance came with a price, and the first to pay was Dr. Harrow himself. Dr. Harrow never believed in curses until he saw his own corpse staring back at him still breathing. It was in the cellar of the Whitlow cabin behind a wall that hadn't been there the day before. The passage was narrow, wet, with something that smelled like rust and rot, and the deeper he went, the louder it got a rhythm, like a heartbeat, but too slow, too ancient. At the end, Harrow found a mirror made of bone, not glass, and in it he saw himself, not as he was, but as something hollowed, stretched, rewritten. His skin was the same, but his eyes were gone, replaced with ink that moved like smoke. It blinked. He didn't. Around him, symbols pulsed on the walls, not painted, but growing. They weren't warnings. They were instructions for what he couldn't yet grasp. But he knew one thing with terrifying clarity: this wasn't possession. This was replacement. Something wasn't haunting Hollow Creek. It was becoming it. And now it wanted the world to look. The town wasn't cursed. It was chosen. That's what Agnes Rook had carved letter by letter into the floorboards of the chapel before she vanished for good. Dr. Harrow, trembling, traced the words with his fingers and felt the wood pulse beneath him warm like flesh. The chapel's walls had shifted too. Portraits of saints now bore faces of Hollow Creek's children smiling, but with eyes made of void. The hymns written in the pew Bibles had changed overnight, their notes forming patterns that matched the sigils inside Harrow's own journals, ones he never remembered drawing. Reality wasn't just bending. It was being rewritten by a script not meant for human minds. The townspeople weren't victims. They were vessels. Every act of faith, every funeral, every birthday candle had been feeding it. Hollow Creek had been nurturing something in its soil for generations. Not a creature, but a memory so old it had become hungry. And now it remembered itself through them. Through us. There would be no rescue, no salvation. Because you can't escape what you've already become. You were never watching the town, it was watching through you. That truth shattered what was left of Dr. Harrow's mind the night he found the ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of Town Hall. Not written in ink, but blood-layered entries dating back centuries, chronicling every birth, every scream, every disappearance. His own name appeared 12 times each, dated before his own birth. The third child wasn't just a harbinger. It was a gate. And Harrow realized too late. The ritual wasn't about summoning something in, it was about letting something out. The births were never random. They were planned, calculated sacrifices to awaken a sentience that didn't live in the woods or the cabin or even the town it lived in, story, in memory, in belief. And once enough people believed it didn't need to exist in flesh, it existed in us. Hollow Creek wasn't a place. It was a virus of thought, a parasitic idea dressed as folklore. And now, as the air thickened and the stars rearranged themselves into symbols, no one should recognize Harrow. Understood this was no longer about survival. It was about containment. The town didn't fall to evil, it evolved into it. That realization struck like thunder when Dr. Harrow found the burial site. But it wasn't underground, it was inside the schoolhouse walls. Behind crumbling plaster, hidden between brick and bone, were dozens of small hands etched in soot. Not imprints, as if the children had pressed through from somewhere else. And behind every wall, the same chilling phrase scratched deep into the wood. Tell our story right, or we tell it ourselves. The children were never lost. They were transcribed. Every drawing they made, every whisper, every nursery rhyme, they were all pieces of the same impossible puzzle. A spell disguised as memory. A memory disguised as truth. The townspeople hadn't just disappeared. They'd been rewritten into myth. And the more the outside world heard about Hollow Creek, the more it fed. The story didn't spread like rumour. It spread like infection. Harrow, shaking, realised this wasn't folklore to be feared. It was a blueprint one being downloaded into every curious mind. And by listening, by remembering, by watching, we were becoming its next authors. You didn't find the story of Hollow Creek, it found you. That's what the final page read, burned into the back of Harrow's journal in handwriting he never remembered using. He hadn't written it, not alone. As he flipped through the pages, he saw entries he'd never penned, conversations he never had, dreams he never dreamt, but memories that now felt real. The journal had become a living thing, writing with him, through him bending time and identity like paper soaked in oil. His thoughts no longer felt like his own. The town had seeded itself in his consciousness, and now it was growing a second mind behind his eyes. He tried to leave, but the roads looped endlessly. The map shifted daily. GPS failed. No one remembered the exits anymore. Hollow Creek didn't need walls or borders. It was a contagion of belief, a self-replicating myth that wore human memory like skin. And once it took root, you weren't haunted, you were harvested. Harrow screamed into the void, but it was too late. He was no longer a visitor in the story. He was the ending it had always been writing toward. The story should have ended when the town was buried, but some things refuse silence. Hollow Creek was never meant to be remembered yet. Here we are speaking its name, feeding its rhythm, replaying its whispers through pixels and sound waves, and with every retelling something wakes up deeper. But the most chilling part, it never needed the town, it only needed an audience. Now as we reach the end, ask yourself, was the curse real? Or was it passed to you the moment you started watching? Some towns vanish. Hollow Creek multiplied. After the fire, after the evacuations, after the state lines were redrawn to erase its name, something still lingered in the static of late-night radio, in sketches made by children who'd never been there in dreams that felt borrowed. Survivors spoke in fragmented riddles, their eyes cloudy, their memories glitching like corrupted files. One woman drew the town's map perfectly, despite being blind since birth. A boy hummed a lullaby from the 1800s, one no living soul should have known. But the worst was Harrow. Found on the side of the highway barefoot and muttering in a dead dialect, his journal fused to his chest by scar tissue. No matter how many times it was burned, pages reappeared in libraries, in school books, in unrelated hard drives. Hollow Creek hadn't been destroyed. It had become data pure story, uncaged viral, ready to echo in every mind curious enough to hear it. And now you've heard it too. The only question left is, how long before it writes through you? What if the town never needed a place, just a pattern? Long after Hollow Creek was declared uninhabitable, reports trickled in from across the country, identical layouts of streets, matching cemetery names, families moving into homes they'd never bought. In Oregon, a girl was found sketching the same crooked chapel from Missouri. In Maine, a man swore the bell tower rang at midnight, even though the town didn't have one. Every recurrence brought whispers, flickering lights, vanishing pets, and that same eerie phrase scrawled somewhere in the dust. We remember what remembers us. Experts blamed mass psychosis, social contagion, urban myth. But what if it was something deeper, a narrative virus using memory as its host? The terrifying brilliance of Hollow Creek wasn't its horror, it was its ability to adapt, to slip into dreams, to rewrite nostalgia, to weaponize forgotten grief. And once it lives in enough minds, it doesn't just haunt, it replicates. Not a place anymore, but a format. Not a curse, but a code. And now that you've heard the pattern, it knows your name too. The most disturbing legacy of Hollow Creek wasn't the silence, it was the echoes. In the months following the town's erasure, 911 calls began spiking in neighbouring counties, each from locations where Hollow Creek shouldn't have existed. Yet the callers described the same landmarks, the leaning silo, the rotted swing set, the church with no cross. But the line always cut before responders arrived. In one chilling case, an operator swore she heard a child whisper, "We're still playing," before the static swallowed her headset. Psychiatrists, theologians, even data scientists were brought in, each offering explanations, none satisfying. Every theory circled the same cold truth: Hollow Creek wasn't finished. It was evolving from land into memory, from memory into voice, from voice into glitch. People began dreaming in first-person perspectives of lives they'd never lived. A woman waking up each night smelling soot and hearing hymns. A teacher drawing maps he couldn't remember learning. These weren't hauntings. They were bleed-throughs. Proof that Hollow Creek had found a way to imprint itself not on land but on consciousness. And once it lives inside enough minds, it doesn't have to return. It already has. The ripple effect didn't end with ghost stories. It infected the living. Weeks after the final excavation, survivors and even researchers began to exhibit identical psychological patterns, speaking in forgotten dialects, humming nursery songs that predated known records, drawing symbols found carved into Hollow Creek's oldest stones. One field investigator vanished entirely, last seen writing the town's name backward on fogged glass. His footage corrupted. His body never found. But the most haunting anomaly came from the lead historian, Dr. Elliot Grace, who documented his descent into madness through a series of voice memos. His final words before disappearing were, "The town isn't buried, it's broadcast." Since then, rumours have circulated about an encrypted frequency, an untraceable wavelength that emits Hollow Creek's last sermon on a loop at 3:13 a.m, syncing with sleep cycles and implanting something. Viewers report sleep paralysis, disassociated memories, even shared hallucinations of a girl with no eyes, humming beneath their beds. Whether mass hysteria or supernatural backlash, one thing is certain: Hollow Creek never wanted escape. It wanted expansion. And in watching, in listening, we may have become its newest parish. And yet, even after the documentaries ended and the experts went silent, the town refused to let go. Visitors still report mirrored reflections lagging behind, or seeing themselves blink twice when they've only done it once. Children speak of a pastor in the floorboards who calls them by names they've never heard but somehow recognize. The local flora, ivy, moss, even wildflowers grow only in the shape of the town's forgotten sigil, a pattern now banned from online forums after claims it causes migraines, nosebleeds, and dissociation. Entire families have moved away, but still dream in Hollow Creek's accent. And just last month, the audio engineer who remastered the original tapes was found catatonic, having scribbled hundreds of identical phrases. We heard it wrong. It wasn't a sermon, it was a summons. Whether Hollow Creek was a cautionary tale, a supernatural echo, or a psychic virus, no one agrees. But one fact remains chillingly unanimous. Those who learn its full story never forget, and worse, they never remember it the same way twice. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the town doesn't want to be understood. It wants to be repeated. In a world oversaturated with haunted houses and forgotten crimes, Hollow Creek doesn't just scare, it lingers. It forces us to confront the quiet horror of believing something was buried, only to realize it was waiting. Not every ghost knocks. Some sit silently beside you, mimicking your breath, matching your heartbeat, becoming you. And maybe that's the real terror, not what happened, but how close it still is. If this story made your skin crawl, or stirred something you can't quite name, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts below what detail haunted you most. Save this video so you can revisit the parts your mind will try to forget. And if you want more unsettling truths wrapped in real history, hit subscribe. Because in places like Hollow Creek, the story doesn't end. It spreads.